My sister looked me dead in the eye and said, "You were never really part of this. You were just convenient." I smiled, set down my glass, and said, "Good to know." Then I drove home, pulled up my laptop, and started making phone calls. By 7 a.m., the venue deposit was frozen. By 9, the catering contract was on hold. By noon, my sister didn't have a wedding anymore, at least not one I was paying for. I need to back up. I am the oldest of 3. My sister is 2 years younger than me, my brother 4 years younger. I have a decent job in healthcare administration, the kind that doesn't sound glamorous but pays well if you're disciplined about it. I've been disciplined about it since I was 22, working double shifts while my sister went through 2 different college majors, and my brother changed apartments 4 times in 3 years, always with my help, always with the understanding that it was temporary. Temporary in my family means something different than it does in the dictionary. Our parents are not bad people in the way you'd imagine. They don't yell. They don't drink. They just operate under this quiet, unspoken belief that I am fine, I will always be fine, and therefore whatever I have can be redirected toward whoever isn't fine at the moment. It started small. A grocery run here, a car payment there. The month my dad's back went out, and insurance covered less than half his physical therapy. The year my sister's financial aid fell short, and she needed $800 by Friday. I never said no. It genuinely never occurred to me to say no, because I loved them, and I figured that's what you do. Then my sister got engaged. His name is Trevor. He's fine. A little loud, kind of obsessed with his fantasy football league, but fundamentally harmless. When my sister called me at 11 on a Tuesday night to tell me he'd proposed, I cried the good kind of tears. I drove over with a bottle of champagne. I absolutely could not afford that week, and sat on her couch until 2 in the morning, listening to her talk about flowers and venues and her dream dress. I was genuinely happy for her. I want to be clear about that, because what came later doesn't cancel that out. The trouble started about 3 weeks in, when my mom mentioned, very casually, that the venue my sister had her heart set on required a $25,000 deposit to hold the date, non-refundable after 30 days. There was a pause in the conversation, the kind of pause that has a shape. I recognized it the way you recognize a familiar smell. I said, "How much do they have saved?" My mom said, "Well, that's the thing." My dad cleared his throat. My sister was quiet, and just like that, I was the plan. I want to say I pushed back. I didn't. I told myself it was a loan, that they'd pay me back over time, that this was a once-in-a-lifetime thing for my sister, and I could make it work. I put the deposit on the venue. Then, over the next 6 months, I also covered the florist retainer, the save the dates, the bridesmaid dress alterations because my sister changed the style twice, and a cake tasting trip to a bakery 4 towns over because the one in our town didn't have the right aesthetic. That last one I paid for with a credit card I had to pay off over 2 months. Nobody said thank you the way you say thank you when someone does something that costs them something. They said thank you the way you say thank you when someone holds a door. The rehearsal dinner was at a steakhouse downtown, my parents' choice. Not somewhere I would have picked, but I didn't say anything. I wore a green dress I'd had since before the pandemic, the one I keep for occasions when I want to look like I have things together without actually spending money. I sat at the far end of the table, next to Trevor's aunt, who was from out of state and didn't know anyone, and kept asking me if I was one of the bridesmaids. I said I was the sister. She said, "Oh, of course, the sister," and then didn't ask me anything else for the rest of the night. My dad stood up to give a toast about halfway through the main course. He talked about my sister for about 4 minutes, which was lovely. He talked about Trevor for 2 minutes, which was appropriate. He thanked Trevor's parents for making the trip. He thanked my aunt and uncle for helping put the rehearsal dinner together. Then he sat down. I counted the people he thanked. I was not one of them. Nobody reacted. Not my mom, not my brother, not any of the 12 people at that table who knew exactly how the past 6 months had been paid for. My sister glanced at me for half a second and then looked away. That glance told me everything. She knew. She'd made a choice about it, and the choice was not to say anything. After dinner, when people were moving around and the night was winding down, I walked up to my sister to hug her. She hugged me back, and then she said it quietly, almost under her breath, the way you say something you've been holding for a while and finally just let slip. She said I needed to understand that the wedding was her day, and she couldn't have me making it about myself or creating tension with her in-laws by acting like I was owed something. That I was always like this. That I never knew how to just be happy for someone else. That, honestly, I had always been more of a financial arrangement than a real part of things. I stood there for a second, then I said, "Okay, thank you for telling me." I hugged her again because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. Then I said goodnight to everyone, got in my car, and sat in the parking garage for about 20 minutes, staring at the concrete wall in front of me. I wasn't crying. I want to be clear about that too. I was calculating. The venue contract was in my name. I had put it there because I was the one with the credit history, the one they needed on the paperwork to make it work. At the time, it felt like a formality. In the parking garage, it felt like leverage. I drove home. I made tea. I opened my laptop. The venue had a modification policy. Full freeze on the booking was possible within a specific window if the primary account holder requested it in writing, pending a review call with the events coordinator. I sent the email at 12:47 a.m. At 7:15, I took the call. By 8:30, the venue was in administrative hold. No services would be rendered until further notice, and the deposit status was under review pending contract terms. Then I called the florist. The florist was easy because I hadn't signed anything yet. I had only done a verbal commitment and put down a small credit card hold that I could release. I released it, then I sat on my couch and waited to see how long it would take. It took 41 minutes. My sister called at 9:11. I didn't answer. She called again at 9:14. I didn't answer. A text came through at 9:16. What did you do? Then another. We can't reach the venue. Then, this is insane, call me right now. My mom called at 9:20. My dad at 9:23. My brother sent a text that just said, "Hey, is everything okay?" which was almost sweet in how much it was pretending not to know. I turned my phone face down and finished my tea. I'm going to tell you what I did next. But first I want to tell you what I did not do. I did not post anything. I did not send a long emotional text explaining myself. I did not call anyone to vent or recruit allies or get someone on my side. I had spent years being the one who kept things quiet, absorbed things, smoothed things over. I understood now that none of that had protected me. It had only made me easier to ignore. What I did do was practical. I pulled up my finances and started going through every recurring thing I had been covering that wasn't mine. The family phone plan that had my parents and my brother on it, which I had added them to 3 years ago when my dad retired and they needed to cut expenses. The streaming services I shared passwords for, which sounds small but adds up. The Amazon account my mom ordered household things from every other week, which she had access to through my payment method. I removed them one by one, slowly and without announcement. By the afternoon, the texts had shifted from angry to confused. Why is the phone not working? Why can't I access the account? What is happening? My dad called from my brother's phone. I picked up that one. He said I was being irrational. He said I was punishing my sister on the most important week of her life over nothing. I asked him what he meant by nothing. He said I was always so sensitive, that I read into things, that my sister hadn't meant anything by what she said. She was just stressed. I asked him if he remembered who paid for the venue. He paused. I asked him if he remembered who covered the florist deposit. He said that wasn't the point. I told him it was actually exactly the point and I had nothing else to say right now, and I hung up. The next call came from my aunt, my mom's older sister, who I genuinely like and who had nothing to do with any of this. She asked if I was all right. I said I was. She said my mom had called her very upset. I said I understood. She didn't push. She just said she was there if I needed to talk, and I thanked her and meant it. What I didn't know until 2 days later was that my mom had also called my aunt to tell her a version of events in which I had sabotaged my sister's wedding out of jealousy and had been unstable for years. My aunt told me this herself. She said she'd listened and then said very calmly, "I've known that girl her whole life. I'm going to need more than your version." The wedding didn't get canceled, to be clear. My sister found another venue. It was smaller, and the date got pushed by 6 weeks, and Trevor's mother was apparently not pleased. I heard this through my brother, who had started texting me again once he realized I wasn't going anywhere and that he needed someone to process things with. My brother and I have always had a different relationship than I had with my sister. He's not a bad person. He's conflict averse to the point of uselessness, but he genuinely cares and he feels things, even when he doesn't act on them. He told me one afternoon, in a long, rambling voicemail, that he'd always known it wasn't fair, the way things worked in our family, the way everything kind of flowed toward me as a resource and away from me as a person. He said he was sorry he'd never said anything before. I appreciated that. I told him it didn't fix it, but I appreciated it. My parents didn't apologize. Instead, they went through a phase I can only describe as strategic reframing. My mom started telling extended family that I had always struggled with generosity, which is a sentence so detached from reality that I had to read it twice when my cousin forwarded me the text. My dad told a family friend that I had financial control issues and that they worried about me. These stories made their way back to me through various channels, and each one was slightly different in the details but consistent in the structure. I was the problem. I had always been the problem. Everything I had done was not generosity but control, not support but a power play, and the fact that I had withdrawn it proved they'd been right to be concerned. I want to tell you I was surprised. I wasn't. What surprised me was what came next. About a month after the rehearsal dinner, I got a notification from my bank's fraud alert system. A credit application had been submitted in my name, a personal loan for $8,000 through an online lender, using my social security number, my birthday, and the address I'd lived at for the 4 years I was on the family phone plan. The application had been submitted from a device I didn't recognize. It didn't go through. I had put a credit freeze on my accounts 2 years ago after a data breach at a company I'd used, just as a precaution, never thinking I'd actually need it for something like this. I requested the full application report. The information used was not something a stranger would have. It was information that lived in documents I had shared with my family over the years, tax forms, insurance paperwork, the lease I'd co-signed for my brother once that I'd emailed as a PDF. Someone who had access to those documents had put together an application. I sat with that for a long time. I didn't confront anyone. There was no point. Whatever conversation we would have had, they would have denied it, turned it around, made me feel like I was being paranoid and accusatory. I had watched that happen enough times on smaller things to know exactly how it would go. What I did was file a report, tighten the freeze, add an extended fraud alert to all 3 bureaus, and document everything carefully. I saved every email, every voicemail, every screenshot of every text since the rehearsal dinner, not because I knew what I'd do with it, but because I was done operating on good faith alone. The wedding happened. I was not invited. Not officially uninvited, just quietly removed from any communications about it, until the day came and went, and I found out through a photo my cousin posted that it had been small but nice. My sister looked genuinely happy in the pictures. I felt something complicated looking at them, not jealousy. More like grief for something I don't think ever really existed the way I wanted it to. After the wedding, the contact from my parents slowed down, which was fine. Then it shifted again, about 6 weeks later, when my dad called on a Sunday afternoon with a different tone entirely. Not angry, not strategic, just tired. He said some things had come up. He said they hadn't been planning well enough and there were some gaps. He asked if I was in a place where I could help bridge things for a couple months while they figured it out. I asked him what kind of gaps. He mentioned the mortgage. He mentioned a car payment. He mentioned that my sister and Trevor had borrowed some money before the wedding and that it hadn't been paid back yet, and the expectation had been that it would be, and it hadn't worked out that way. I asked him if he'd talked to my sister about that. He said that was complicated. I said I understood that it was complicated. I said I also wanted him to understand that I had spent years being the uncomplicated option, the one everyone came to when things got complicated elsewhere, and I needed him to understand that I wasn't available for that anymore. Not because I didn't love them, but because I had spent a significant portion of my adult life subsidizing a version of our family that didn't include me as a real member of it, and I was done doing that. He was quiet for a while. Then he said he didn't think that was a fair characterization. I told him I wasn't looking for an argument about whether it was fair. I said goodbye, and I meant it kindly. There were more calls over the next few weeks. My mom's messages moved from requesting to pleading to something that felt calculated in a way that I recognized. She knew which words had worked on me before. She used them. She talked about how hard things had been. She talked about how she had always done her best. She said once, in a voicemail I have saved, that she hoped I understood that whatever I thought had happened, she had always loved me more than I knew, and that it broke her heart that I had chosen to walk away from my family. I had not walked away. I had stopped writing checks. I have been in my apartment for almost 3 months now. Same apartment I was already in before any of this, which I think some people assume I left dramatically, but I didn't. I just stopped going to Sunday dinners. I stopped being available on the phone in the way I used to be. That open-ended availability, where I'd answer at any hour and stay on for an hour and absorb whatever the problem was. I stopped that. What I started instead is harder to describe, but easier to feel. I started sleeping through the night. I started spending weekends doing nothing important and not feeling guilty about it. I bought a couch I actually like, not the cheap functional one I'd had for 6 years, because every time I thought about upgrading, I thought about someone in my family who needed something more urgently. I signed up for a ceramics class that meets Thursday evenings, and I am genuinely bad at it, and it genuinely does not matter. My brother and I talk sometimes. He's working through his own stuff. I don't hold his neutrality against him the way I might have before, because I understand now that navigating our family requires a kind of psychological gymnastics that takes different forms for different people. He survived by disappearing. I survived by being indispensable. Neither of us came out clean. My aunt, my mom's sister, called me last month. We talked for almost 2 hours. She told me things about my parents' dynamic that I hadn't known, patterns that apparently went back further than me, further than my sister and my brother. She wasn't making excuses. She was just giving me context, filling in the shape of something I'd felt my whole life but couldn't fully see. When we hung up, I sat quietly for a long time and let myself feel sad about that. Not the burning, exhausted sadness of being actively inside it, the quiet sadness of finally understanding it. My sister sent me a message a few weeks ago. No opening, no lead-in, just, I said something awful to you and I've been sitting with it. I don't expect you to respond, but I needed you to know I know that. I read it 3 times. I didn't respond right away. I'm still thinking about it. I don't have a clean answer about what comes next with her. I know what I won't do. I won't go back to being what I was before, the version of me that funded things and swallowed things and waited to be included like a guest in my own family. That version is gone. Whether there's a different version of a relationship possible, I genuinely don't know yet. Some things take time to find their shape. What I know is this. I spent a long time believing that if I just gave enough, helped enough, stayed available enough, I would eventually earn my place. I would become undeniably necessary, and that necessity would translate into belonging. What I understand now is that you cannot earn belonging from people who have already decided you're a resource. You can only decide that you deserve it somewhere else. I have a plant on my windowsill that I've managed to keep alive for 11 weeks, which is a personal record. I have a drawer full of ceramics that are lopsided and glazed in colors I chose myself. I have a Friday night routine that belongs entirely to me. I have an emergency fund that nobody else has access to, and when I check it, I feel something I can only describe as clean. I'm not telling you this because I have it figured out. I'm telling you this because 6 months ago, I was sitting in a parking garage after a rehearsal dinner, tallying up what I was worth to the people who were supposed to love me first. And the answer I got back was a number. I decided I was more than that. Turns out I was right.